West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
And now for the readings led by Chris.
Thank you, Babette. These readings are both quite short, actually, but nevertheless important as ever. And at the end of the readings, we customarily add the phrase offered as wisdom for the journey, and we are invited all to respond with, may we walk in its light. Just an invitation, nothing compulsory about it. So here is the first reading. I'll say who said it after. If you go back a few hundred years, what we take for granted today would seem like magic. Being able to talk to people over long distances, being able to transmit images, flying, accessing vast amounts of data like an oracle. These are all things that would have been considered magic just a few hundred years ago. Those words are from Elon Musk, a businessman and investor. He is the founder, chairman, CEO and CTO of SpaceX. CEO, product architect and former chairman of Tesla and president of the Musk Foundation. Doesn't get much bigger than that. He is one of the wealthiest people in the world with an estimated net worth of $210 billion. Hard to even imagine $1 billion, but 210. The second reading is another quote and goes, "The first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second rule is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency." Words this time from Bill Gates, an American businessman, investor, philanthropist, writer, best known for being the co-founder of the software giant Microsoft and prominent pioneer of the microcomputer revolution of the 1970s and 80s. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of the largest philanthropic foundations in the world and part of the Global Alliance to Eradicate Polio. Offered as wisdom for the journey, may we walk in its light. Babette.
And today I wanted to talk about three people that I particularly admire, have learned a great deal from, that were innovators extraordinaire, that brought knowledge and wisdom and contributed something very meaningful. With a slight apology to say these are all male, and we did celebrate the International Women's Day on Friday, but we had a terrific presentation last week on some outstanding women that had made huge contributions to society. So with that footnote, I just want to introduce you to three people that have had a profound impact on my learning, life experience, attitude, and actions, and have learned greatly from. Next slide, please. And introducing you to Dr. William Osler, also Sir William Osler, and just very briefly is probably considered the father of modern medicine. And I'll give more detail as to how he achieved that title, but a very interesting life and a physician that brought terrific things to the world. The next character I'd like you to meet is Dr. Ken Cooper, and he is a cardiologist and fitness expert that started the aerobics movement, the idea of being active and how that's good for your heart health and body. And then finally, Paul Harris. And Paul Harris was a lawyer in Chicago who started the Rotary movement. So I'm hoping in the next little while that you'll gain some familiarity with these people. I think probably you would have heard of at least one of them likely, but permit me to introduce you to them and travel along on a little journey as to what they did contribute to our society. Next slide, please. Well, these folks were writers, speakers, and leaders. And I would say that only one of them remains alive, but great contributions. And starting with William Osler, he wrote the Principles and Practice of Medicine textbook, the first edition in 1892. Now, this textbook has been taken over by other authors, but it's still one of the sort of leading references for physicians, and it was the template laid down by Sir William in the late 1800s. In 1968, the book called Aerobics, and I have a copy here, it's getting a little yellow and faded, but it was published in the spring of 1968. And also an abbreviated version was published in Reader's Digest. So it reached a large population of people, and we'll get into more detail of the movement that Ken Cooper started and where his career took him. And then finally, that is a copy of the Rotarian magazine, and dealing with the founder of Rotary, Paul Harris. And in the early 1900s, as a lonely single lawyer in Chicago, he invited a few friends to get together and started something that grew astronomically to become a very large movement in the world. Next slide, please. Just a few quotes to start off, and these are introducing you to the folks that I'm going to highlight. You can read that, but I'll read it too. Desire to take medicine is perhaps the greatest feature which distinguishes man, substitute humans, from animals. Sir William Osler said that. So for those of you that don't like taking pills, Sir William felt that many people did want to take medication. Ken Cooper said this: we do not stop exercising because we grow old. We grow old because we stop exercising. And then finally, the short quote from Paul Harris: Rotary changes us and then we serve. I believe we can change the world one lifetime at a time. And next slide, please. So, as I said, these three men have been an influence on my life. And one is Canadian, and that would be Dr. William Osler. The other two are Americans. One is still alive, and that would be Dr. Ken Cooper, who is now 93, but still active in appearing and speaking and introducing people to his concepts of a lifetime of being active. There are many women whom I admire, but that's not the topic of this speech. And we certainly got a great presentation last week by Scott. Next slide, please. So, introducing you to William Osler. He was born in Bond Head, which is way up Highway 27 on the way to Barrie. He was born in 1849 and educated at McGill University, getting his MD in 1872. Now, if I could let you in on a little joke that doctors often have, it would go like this. Well, why did he go to McGill University? And the doctor would answer, well, because he couldn't get into University of Toronto or couldn't get into Western. At any rate, that wasn't true for Dr. Osler. I'm sure he could have gotten into any university, but McGill opted to include him. So he graduated in 1872, and within a very short period of time, he was appointed to the esteemed position of being professor of medicine. Now, his medical career took him to England, and he also studied and taught at Trinity College in the United Kingdom, and then came to the United States and was one of the founding fathers of Johns Hopkins Hospital Complex in Baltimore. Sir William has 11 honorary degrees, and in the United Kingdom, he was given the title of baronet, which is the lowest royalty title that one can get, but was recognized there. And one of the strange characteristics is that Canada, the UK, and the United States all claim that Dr. William Osler was their own, when in fact he traveled and shared much of his career and wisdom in 3 countries. Next slide, please. We're now going to talk a little bit about some of his quotes, but as the father of modern medicine, he essentially transformed medical education into one of being an applied art that wasn't just learned in the classroom, but at the bedside. And it was under his leadership that the evolution of clinical clerks, medical students, interns, and residents all learned and worked together, usually with a mentor or director or supervisor, as they learned both in the classroom and at the bedside. You can see a picture of him at a much younger age, and certainly that big mustache was a characteristic of him throughout his career. And he said this: to study medicine without books is to sail an uncharted sea, while to study medicine from books alone is not to go to sea at all. Next slide, please. Things that he did leave behind was the Osler Library at McGill, and it is a rather rich treasure of rare material and research articles, original articles. Much of it is digitized and is accessible to us all if we are wanting to look into some of the things that Dr. Osler brought. He introduced the modern medicines of teaching physiology, and he also organized Canada's first course in microscopy. He left his signature as well on Osler's nodes, which are some abnormalities observable on fingertips in people with heart disease, and also Osler's sign. I'd like to just share a few quotes from Dr. Osler. He said, "The good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient who has the disease." And now just a few things that he said, and some of these you will have heard in other settings and not realize that it came from Dr. Osler. Throw away all ambition beyond that of doing a day's work well. So that was one of his mantras. Medicine is learned by the bedside and not in the classroom. A physician who treats himself has a fool for a patient. Medicine is the science of uncertainty and an art of probability. The philosophies of one age have become the absurdities of the next, and the foolishness of yesterday has become the wisdom of tomorrow. And that was kind of hinted at in one of our readings, that, looking back 50 years ago, the things that we thought were true and wise have been replaced by new knowledge. And lest we get arrogant or proud about things, I'm sure we'll be looking back at 2024 and saying, wow, can't believe they did that, or use that as a treatment for that condition. Another Osler truism: soap and water and common sense are the best disinfectants. And that's certainly been true in hospitals, because preaching and enforcing hand hygiene is one of the commonest ways to prevent the spread of infection. To have striven, to have made the effort, to have been true to certain ideals, this alone is worth the struggle. The name Osler is a German occupational name for mule driver. Still have a little tidbit. That's where the name had come from. And his thirst for one of the things that he did was he was the first one to use the term neuropsychology, which is encompassing biological and psychological aspects of psychiatric disease. So again, we get back to this holistic approach of not just treating the disease, but treating the whole patient. So that's our approach to Dr. William Osler. Of course, I believe the Osler Medical Complex in Brampton is named after him, as are several other locations. And just to review, he was born in Bond Head. Excuse me for a brief moment. And carrying on. Next slide, please. Well, let's go for a jog with Dr. Cooper. Ken Cooper was born in Oklahoma in 1931. And the first part of his career was as a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. His education was at the University of Oklahoma, and he got his master's and PhD subsequently. After his term in the Armed Forces, he opened the Cooper Heart Center in Dallas, Texas, where he still presides and still appears and practices medicine at the age of 93. He just had his birthday, by the way. Happy birthday, Ken Cooper. His motto: exercise is medicine. Next slide, please. So back to the concept of aerobics, and that is that the exercise increases heart rate, boosts endurance, reduces body fat, and prolongs life. His introduction, or coming into the spotlight, occurred in the spring of 1968. And because of this book, he received an award from Harvard. And as I mentioned, it was published as a book in 1968, the abridged edition available in Reader's Digest. And I recall very clearly reading that excerpt in Reader's Digest and getting the book. And in fact, there's a little inscription here, 1969, that says, I hate to share a personal reflection here, "Merry Christmas, Louise. Love, Mike." So we got into the aerobics movement, and part of the fitness revolution when it all started. Next slide, please. So related to this was the concept of participation, that it was helpful to have some regular activity every day or frequently. And as knowledge expanded, this became something that could be prescribed. The definition of aerobic exercise is doing something on a sustained basis that involves your large muscles and movement, and carrying that on for a period of time. So when you do this, although you might get fatigued, your oxygen level remains fairly constant, while other things in your body changes to provide the blood flow and oxygen to the muscles. With anaerobic exercise, which is the kind of exercise where you do build up a oxygen debt, that would be, for example, like running full speed to do the 100-yard dash or 200 yards, where you are really exerting yourself and come near collapsing at the end and then regaining your breath. With the training effect, you can go faster, longer, and expend more energy as your body adapts to that. Now, Dr. Cooper's concept was to start out by doing what was called the 12-minute test. And you would go to an area, perhaps a high school track, and see how far you could go in 12 minutes. When you had done that, then you would look at a chart on the in his book or online, and it would put your fitness into a category level. So let's say you could run 8 miles an hour, so that in 1/5 of that, 12 minutes, then you would be going to just under 1.5. Lost my train of thought there. Miles in that time, so that you could calculate that out. Cooper's prescription was to find an activity you can do regularly and then engage in it. Now, as a measure of fitness, I mean, there are various things that we can do, but a good guide to your fitness level would be, very simply, your heart rate and your resting heart rate. In a normal healthy adult, the resting heart rate would be 60 to 90. With training, your resting heart rate will decrease as the heart becomes more efficient and is able to pump more blood to the muscles. So the training effect will do that. And as I said, a good monitor of your fitness level is your heart rate. Not to beat the drum with my name on it, but I do have a watch that I have up. I'm watching on my timer here so that you don't all miss your lunch. It also has a heart rate monitor, and it will tell me what my pulse is at any given time. And so with being fit, your resting heart rate will decrease. And subsequently, in my practice, I had an elite long distance runner whose resting heart rate was in the 30s. A resting heart rate below 60 is indicating you are quite fit. And I'm not going to tell you mine unless you ask. However, if you are moved to do some regular exercise and follow the participation prescription, because what had happened is that it was determined that it is best to get 150 minutes of some kind of sustained activity a week. It is best and healthiest if you could do that activity at a conversational pace. So if you were with someone else, you wouldn't be gasping for your breath, but you could carry on for 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes at a time. And activities that are suitable would be walking, jogging, running, cycling, working on an exercise machine, swimming, rowing. Things like cross-country skiing are really quite good. It's a good exercise, but you really can't do that 12 months of the year. So you'd have to have something else to do. If you are moved to say, wow, that really sounds like something I'd like to do, there's a caution that you probably should see your doctor before starting an exercise program. And often what comes into the focus here is that people will say, oh my gosh, I heard about that guy on the marathon that had a heart attack and died. Well, people have heart attacks doing just about every activity you can imagine. And so we think that the best thing to do is to make sure your heart is stable before you start a new exercise program. Next slide, please. So this is from, I called Ken Cooper the aerobic guru, the training effect, what your heart is telling you, your resting heart rate, your maximum heart rate. A little rule of thumb for your maximum heart rate is it's 220 minus your age. So if you do the math there, then you should be able to get your heart rate up to 130 or 140 when you are exercising. A good measure of your fitness as well is how quickly you recover after you maintain and have that heart rate. How much exercise should you get? Well, it depends. But again, the Participation Health Canada and other references say that, as I said, 150 minutes a week would be the target. 3 times 50 minutes would be good. Now, there are all kinds of time and distance gadgets now. The pedometer, the little device that you put on your belt or in your pocket, would tell you how many steps that you had taken. And another goal would be to get 10,000 steps a day. Any of you folks had done your step counting or used a gadget to that. That basically means that you're going to have to be doing something for close to an hour or with a little more intensity for over half an hour. So having times, distance, and gadgets sometimes is a good motivator to help you judge your improvement and to make it a little more fun and gauging what you're doing. Next slide, please. Now, here's make it doable, fun, and sustainable. My new exercise program is already changing my body. I can feel my fat being transformed into excuses. So if you're looking for an excuse not to do something, you can always find it. That's one of my axioms in life. So next slide. We're moving on to introduce you to the last of the 3 featured people today. Paul Harris, the founder of Rotary. He was born in Wisconsin, 1868. He was actually one of 6 children and was raised by his grandparents. Sort of a tale of some hardships and difficulties. Raised in Vermont. He went to the University of Iowa to get his law degree, and he got an honorary law degree from the university. I got that mixed up. Iowa was his basic law degree, Vermont honorary. Next slide. In his early life, he worked at various jobs and traveled quite widely over the United States and the United Kingdom and Europe. He was a teacher, stock company, actor, cowboy. He sold marble and granite in the United States and married the love of his life, Jean Thompson, in 1910. There's a picture of a young Paul Harris dressed in some kind of school uniform. Next slide, please. He moved to Chicago in 1896 to practice law. And he was single and kind of lonely and said, I wonder if I could recruit a few of my friends and we could get together for some good discussion, some friendship and socializing. The idea was that the folks would go and each member would host a meeting in their office. Therefore, they rotated the meetings and thus came the name Rotary. The first 4 Rotarians were Paul Harris, of course, and Sylvester Scheel, a coal merchant, Gustav Lair, mining engineer, and Hiram Shorey, a merchant tailor. He's the one that's best dressed there. Next slide, please. So these folks came from different professions, and it was felt healthy to not just have a club of lawyers or accountants, but to look at classifications. And that was an attitude that persisted in Rotary for many years. It's now no longer regarded as an objective, but trying to get different backgrounds for sure. Initially, it was for fun and mutual cooperation. And as I said, the meetings would rotate from one business or office to another. Next slide, please. After that first club in Chicago in 1905, the second club started in San Francisco in 1908. Now, initially it was a social gathering, but the folks that were meeting said, I wonder if there are things that we might do in our community that would make it better. And the first service project of Rotary happened in Chicago in 1907, and it was the installation of public toilets. Certainly, in that time, you probably couldn't walk into a business and say, can I use your toilet? But this made it possible for folks to have free access to restroom facilities. In 1910, the first club outside the United States was founded in Winnipeg. In 1917, they started to experiment with the idea of endowments and doing service projects. And from that, developed the Rotary Foundation in 1928, which is one of the largest charitable foundations in the world. Next slide, please. So the motto was service above self. And although you may come with a business or profession, the object is not to self-promote, it's to get to know the other folks. So it's not like the Chamber of Commerce or the Better Business Bureau. People are free to engage the services of fellow Rotarians, but not obliged or expected to do so. So as it started as a club with 5 people, today there are over 1.4 million Rotarians in 35,000 clubs in over 200 countries. Sad to say, Rotary was a men's club for much of its early existence. And because of a constitutional challenge in the United States, in California, I believe, it was stated that the Rotary Club could not exclude women, and women were included in 1988. That was right around the time I joined and first started my Rotary experience, and certainly felt that Rotary should not be men only. I sponsored the first 2 women in my Rotary Club at that time. There were a few men that weren't too happy about that and a few that did leave, but Rotary was stronger with the inclusion of women. And certainly that has proved true over the years. Next slide. Rotary's principle or motto is called in the 4-way test. And I'll just read it quickly. Of the things we think, say, and do, we ask ourselves these questions. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And finally, will it be beneficial to all concerned? So it's postulating a win-win in any ventures or activities that are being considered. So this was adopted almost 100 years ago. Next slide, please. The Rotary Foundation, as I said, started shortly after Rotary itself, and you can read this, but it's a nonprofit corporation supported by voluntary donations from Rotarians and others, and it is designed to achieve world understanding and peace through educational and cultural exchange projects supported solely by voluntary contributions. Next slide. Rotary has 7 areas of focus. So these are concerns for which service projects, fundraising, and changing society come into effect. And I'll just go through them. Peace building and conflict resolution, basic education and literacy, disease prevention and treatment. Rotary is one of the major partners in the eradication of polio. Polio should be an extinct disease because we have very effective prevention, but there are still areas in the world where the wild polio virus exists. And although there are fewer than 100 cases a year, it still does exist, particularly in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Africa has been polio-free for 10 years, and South Asia has been polio-free for a longer time. But Rotary is one of the partners in the Global Eradication Initiative, which also includes the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control, UNICEF, and the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they fund money so that every year Rotary, if Rotary can raise $50 million, they will do a 2-to-1 match and match that with $100 million to get vaccines where it's needed, to get surveillance, treatment, and screening where that's needed. Another area of focus is water, sanitation, and hygiene, protecting the environment, maternal and child health, and sustainable development, which includes having jobs, education, and training for young people to gain and become independent. Next slide, please. Rotary's new vision statement. Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. And West Hill, does that kind of sound somewhat familiar? That's very much what Vision Work says. So I thought that there's a very fortunate alignment of those ideals. And next slide. Rotary's core values, and I once attended a international conference, which is a big gathering of Rotarians. In 2010, it was in Montreal. 2018, it was in Toronto, and over 30,000 people attended. So the core values are fellowship, which has been upgraded to friendship, because fellowship might have some religious connotations, so they felt that just changing that word. Integrity, diversity, service, and leadership. Those are the core values that drive Rotary. And that's the Rotary symbol is that cogwheel pin, lapel pin, which started off as a wagon wheel, but then as business and industry, they put some cogs in it, and that is the international symbol for Rotary. Paul Harris is on some of the lapel pins and things that we have. Next slide, please. And Rotary's highest award is a Paul Harris Fellow. And in order to do that, a club either awards it or someone contributes $1,000 US to the Rotary Foundation, and they can give this medallion and pin and certificate to a Rotarian or non-Rotarian that has made a major contribution to the work of Rotary or other good deeds in the community. So many many agencies and leaders and mayors and so on are sometimes awarded the Paul Harris Award. Rotary sets itself up as being not political and not religious, so does not take a stand in those areas. So that gives a wider opportunity to look for peace and reconciliation where there are differences of opinion. Next slide. And that concludes my introduction to 3 people whom I admire. I was going to take the Don McLean song and say the 3 men I admire most, but then that led in a road that I didn't want to go down. So these are the innovators whom I admire: Dr. William Osler, Dr. Ken Cooper, and Paul Harris. All made huge contributions to my personal life, but also to society. And just a word about me and Rotary. I joined Rotary in 1987. So I've spent almost half my life as a Rotarian and have engaged in many community and international projects and fundraising and met some terrific people. This is not a sales pitch for Rotary, but someone out there might say, wow, I wonder if there's a club in my area. Well, there probably is. And if you don't know how to find them, just connect with me and I can help you. But a great opportunity. Rotary meets either weekly or bi-weekly. Typical meeting lasts an hour. My club meets on Friday mornings. We get together, start a meeting at 7:30, are out the door at 8:30, and the rest of the day people can work and do their activity. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you for your kind attention. I'm really delighted that 30 cameras turned in today, and it looked like there are about 15 folks in the hall. I don't know if questions are permitted, but I'll turn my microphone off and turn it back to Scott. Thank you.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.